welcome everybody to the regular Planning Commission meeting. Can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Alain?
Here.
Commissioner Irvin?
Here.
Commissioner Hirschbein?
Present.
Commissioner Maruzzi?
Here.
Commissioner Song?
Present.
Vice Chair Roberts?
I am present. Thank you, everyone. Can we have a report on the posting of the agenda?
Yes, Chairman and Commissioners, our agenda was posted on Thursday, October 7th, 2021. Our meeting has been posted in accordance with state law.
Thank you so much. So we're now at the time in our meeting for public comments. The general public has 3 minutes to speak to us on pretty much anything they like. And that time is now. So if there is somebody who wants to speak, please let me know. Show your face and let us know that you want to speak to us.
Before we get to that, we want to look over acceptance of agenda, if there's any changes to the agenda.
Yeah, thank you. I'm jumping ahead. Any changes to the agenda? Anything that anyone wants to pull?
One thing I'd like to ask is Chair Wermuck had some issues with one of the Planning Commission minutes, and I don't know if these 2 minutes are the ones where she asked for some changes, but if they are, I'd like her to have a chance to review them before we approve them.
So we can pull them and have them come back, but do we know which ones they were?
Yeah, I don't. Maybe staff does.
Any thoughts on this?
Ms. Hintz, which were the minutes that were requested to be updated? Let's see. Your microphone is muted.
They were the July 28th minutes.
Okay. Shall we pull those and have them continue those to our next meeting?
I'd like to do that. I think she had some specific things she wanted to review in the rewritten minutes. I'd like to give her that opportunity.
Okay. Any other changes to the agenda that we have today?
Yes, I would like co-chair or
Yes.
yes, I would like to pull item 1C from the consent calendar.
Okay. 1C is a request for a general plan conformity finding for a vacation of a 20-foot wide ingress-egress easement. Okay. Any other changes to the agenda? Okay. I think we're all set. Do we need a vote on that?
I'll motion to approve with changes.
Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone against? Great. We'll move forward. We will now move forward to our public comments. If anybody wants to speak, can they let us know right now?
Hi, my name is Claire Rogers. I'd like to speak, please.
Hi, Claire. You're up.
Oh, thank you very much. First one up. So thank you for having me on. I have just moved to Palm Springs from London, England about 4 months ago. It's my intention to open up a cat cafe in Palm Springs. You currently have 4,000 homeless cats in Palm Springs, and there's 200 in the Palm Springs Animal Shelter alone. If you don't know what a cat cafe is, basically proprietors will come in, will have a beverage and a pastry and have the chance to have a cuddle with a cat for an hour. And also I want to work with the Palm Springs Animal Shelter to help have cats adopted out. There's 125 cat cafes in the United States. There's 12 in California, and it's a very successful model for a business, but also to help out have cats being adopted. I have run into a zoning issue, though, in the sense that Palm Springs doesn't allow cats to overnight in any commercial premises due to a kenneling restriction because there's a concern for noise. I believe that this zoning restriction came into place before anybody had ever heard of cat cafes. And so I wanted to speak to you to find out, how is it possible to grant an exception to this? I'm not proposing to try and change the entire law or anything like that, but I'd like to be able to open up this cat cafe to help the entire community. I want to do lots of charity events there and so forth. But like I said, I've run into this kenneling issue.
So, Claire, thank you so much for bringing that to us. It sounds like an exciting concept. Because we can only speak specifically to items that are on our agenda tonight, what I would do is direct you to the two staff members here, the director of our planning, Director Fag, and Mr. Newell, one of our senior planners. Come in and speak with them, and they can help you with that process and get you onto our calendar for this. And we'll do what we can to help you with this.
Okay, fantastic. So how will I get those contact details, please?
You can simply call City Hall. You can go online to the City of Palm Springs and click the button for the planning department. And you can speak to virtually any planner and or Director Fag, who is here with us tonight.
Okay.
Ms. Rogers, you already have my email address.
Yes, and you've been very, very helpful. Thank you very much. So as I say, I'm not trying to change the laws or anything like that. I just want to try and get an exception.
So, and Claire, if we as individuals can help you, we are all online there on the city site, and we can speak to you individually, or a few of us can, if we can help you.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for your help. I really appreciate it.
You bet.
Thank you. Any
other public comments on anything tonight? Going once? Going twice? Okay, we are going to close public comments for this evening, and we will move right into our consent calendar. So we have pulled the July 28th minutes from our consent calendar, and we have also pulled item number
1C.
There it is, 1C from the consent calendar. Without those two items, can I get a motion on the consent calendar?
I would second that with congratulations or an acknowledgement to the architect, Carlo Parente, for the house on Rim Road. It's quite something.
Okay.
And I believe that he was very responsive to the comments of the Architectural Review Committee, and that's a good thing.
So I think Peter made the motion. I think Lori seconded it. I'd like to also comment to Mr. Parente that this is a beautiful design. Thank you. It's always exciting to have great new architects come and do lovely things here. And it's a beautiful house that you designed. It's very exciting.
Well, thank you both. I don't know if I'm allowed to speak, but I'll just say thank you to both of you. That's very kind of you.
You're very welcome. Okay, then let's move on to the planning director's report.
So we need to take a vote on this.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Maruzzi.
Yes.
Commissioner Layan.
Yes.
Commissioner Urban.
Yes.
Commissioner Hirschbein.
Yes.
Commissioner Song.
Yes.
Vice Chair Roberts.
Yes, thank you. Okay, now we will go on to the planning director's report.
Actually, Mr. Vice Chair, we need to discuss item 1C.
I jumped ahead, didn't I? God,
You're really trying to get the meeting over with.
Yeah, I'm really trying to honor that for all of you. Okay, let's go to item 1C, and can we get a staff report on that?
Yes, Vice Chair Roberts and Commissioners, this item is a request to vacate an existing easement that was approved as a part of the tract map 36446. We've described the location. It is a segment of road that is improved within the downtown development, the Downtown Palm Springs specific plan. It's a 20-foot wide easement that exists. However, within this easement area, when the development was improved, the planters that were installed in the roadway there were actually installed within the easement, and it obstructs public access or emergency access, ingress and egress through that roadway. So as a result, staff is recommending that we vacate the easement. There's no need to retain that easement for emergency services. It was reviewed by our fire department, and they have agreed that there is no purpose for retaining that easement. So with that, I'll conclude my report, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
Because Commissioner Song brought this, you want to start with any questions from staff?
Yeah, so once it's vacated, then it becomes property of the landlord, and therefore they would creatively design and use it so that it enhances the businesses that are being proposed on fronting that alleyway. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, it is currently private property, but there was the easement in question that was supposed to remain open for emergency access only. But yes, correct. If the easement is vacated, they could do outdoor activity within that space and not be in violation of the easement.
And therefore, because it's private property, the parklet design issues would not apply in this case because it is a private property.
Correct. So we would allow outdoor dining within that space and not have any issues related to maintaining that clear path over that easement area.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff on this item? I'm sorry.
I'd just like to have staff confirm that in paragraph E or section E of the resolution, that the property is now improved, not unimproved, and that we can change the last sentence to reflect that.
That is correct. We will make the correction to the resolution as noted.
Thank you.
I have a question for staff. So by allowing this right-of-way to now be used as the rest of the land would normally be used, does this alter their allowable building area or square footage?
No, it does not. Per the specific plan, this is to remain as a pedestrian way, and so consequently, they cannot encroach into it.
Okay. Any more questions for staff on this item?
Well, by not encroaching into it, do you mean they couldn't have outside dining?
Yes, they can have outside dining, but buildings, physical structures would not encroach into it.
Okay, thanks. Would they need to maintain a minimum access width for pedestrians? In other words, could they take the whole 20 feet or whatever?
For the outdoor dining, no, they need to maintain pedestrian access through the area. I don't believe that we have a specific minimum distance, but per ADA standards, it would need to be at least 6 feet in width.
Okay, thanks.
And Director Fagg, would they not have already had the use of that easement for dining and those other uses, even as an easement, as long as nothing was permanent?
Potentially they would have, but they were restricted by the fact that it needed to remain for emergency access. And so there's a minimum distance that has to remain open. And so it would have severely limited the amount of space that they could use for things such as outdoor dining.
Got it. And then that planter kind of took care of that anyway, right?
Exactly.
That took it over the top. Any other questions for this? You need a motion for approval on this.
I'll make a motion to approve and follow through the recommendations of staff.
I'll second that. Anyone opposed on this? Motion carries. Okay, let's move on to our one public hearing, 2A. We have a recommendation of staff to continue this item to our meeting of October 27th.
Yes, please.
Can we get a motion for that?
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. For unfinished business, we have none. New business, none, unless somebody has something I don't know about. And we can then move right into our first of two discussion items, 5A. Can we get a staff report or staff comment?
Certainly, Mr. Vice Chair and members of the Planning Commission. As you'll recall, at our last Planning Commission meeting, we had a discussion of a proposed gas station at the existing Walmart store on East Ramon. The applicant was requesting a variance from a rather specific requirement in the section of the code that deals with gas stations, which requires that they have a building associated with the gas station of a minimum of 700 square feet. The application was found not to be in conformance to the requirements for a variance or the findings for a variance. So consequently, direction was given to staff to look at the existing code and perhaps propose something that would facilitate developments such as the Walmart gas station and any other development similar to that. So with that, we did a very quick run through of the standards that pertain to gas stations and have proposed a number of changes, which we have before you this evening. As you'll see from the memo, we are proposing to reduce the amount of square footage of any building associated with a gas station from 700 square feet to 400 square feet. The reason for that is to match more or less the proposal that was submitted by Walmart. However, there is no magic number associated with that. So if the Planning Commission chooses, we could either come up with a different square footage or we could eliminate it as it stands if you feel it's unimportant. In terms of the background on that, I can just assume that for some reason in the city's history, they wanted to avoid having gas stations that had just like an 8 by 8 foot kiosk, that they wanted something more substantial. As you can see in some of the iconic gas stations we have in town, the Tramway gas station, the one just immediately to the south of it, and others in town, which are rather iconic designs. However, things have changed substantially relative to the development of gas stations, and I don't know that that requirement is necessary. While we did look at changing that requirement, there are others that we have also proposed to be updated, and I list those in the bullet points on the front of your memo. Some of them are just rather minor, for example, updating references to the code or having frontage on a major highway. We don't use that term in the general plan any longer, just changing that to thoroughfare. Other standards, again, just don't seem to be applicable any longer. For example, there was a requirement relative to the number of pumps that you had to have 2,000 square feet of lot area for every pump. It's not been my experience that they typically regulate the number of pumps in zoning ordinances. Typically, that's done by your required lot coverage and parking and things like that. So I don't see that as being a necessary requirement. There are other things in terms of outside operations that we just don't see. Typically, changing of tires is not something that we would want to happen outdoors at the gas station. And that function has changed over the years that we now have specific tire stores instead of typically having that use at a gas station. Other things such as vending machines and things like that we typically don't find any longer at gas stations. So those are the significant changes that we are proposing. Vice Chair Roberts, I believe that you had asked a question in terms of other standards that we haven't proposed to change. One of those being the minimum site area for a gas station. Our zoning code specifies that it must have a minimum of 20,000 square feet. I don't know that that particular number is related to anything specific other than just making sure that the site has adequate area for circulation, getting the delivery trucks, the semi-trucks that deliver the fuel, adequate room to maneuver on the site, things like that. And so that's the only reason that I can surmise why that requirement is there, but it doesn't necessarily need to be there. There's another requirement relative to a minimum of 10% landscape area, not a magic number, but I would recommend that we retain at least some minimum percentage of landscaping. Typically for gas stations, you want to see the first 10 feet of area adjacent to the street landscaped. with either some type of landscape material that helps to screen the use somewhat. But I think it's important to have some type of minimum landscaping requirement, and that number may be up for debate from the Planning Commission. So that concludes my report to you. I'm happy to take any questions or comments you might have on these proposed changes.
Thank you, Director, and thank you for bringing up the issues that I gave to you earlier. I would like to discuss that more, but I'd like us to take any other questions from the Planning Commission to staff. Commissioner Song?
Yes, the question I had was about the electric vehicle charging spaces. In the situation where it's a gas station, should it be based on the number of pumps? And where I'm coming on this is that the actual, if we base the parking spaces required based on the retail or area, and now it's based on 400, then it will never surpass the 10 spaces that require an EV charging station. And in some ways, we're balancing gas with electric. And so should a new ratio be provided based on the number of pumps when it comes to specifically this type of business?
That's a very good question, and thank you for bringing that up. Staff will look at that, and if we come back with a revised version of this proposal, what we'll do is we'll tailor that more for the gas station use. One of the things we do want to encourage is thinking of gas stations not just as selling gas, but also as refueling stations as we look at alternative fuels. And so charging stations and maybe, hydrogen, compressed natural gas, whatever comes down the pike, we want to make sure that the use accommodates that. So thank you, and we'll make that change.
Other questions or comments for staff? Commissioner Olayan. You're muted.
Director Fagg, is a conditional use permit currently required for all automobile service stations?
Yes, it is.
I was a little bit concerned or had some questions with the outside operations, much like we see today that we're revisiting the ordinance because things have changed in how gas is distributed, purchased, sold, and how our lifestyles are built around it. I hate to preclude by ordinance anything other than refueling with gas, air, and water. Would it be possible or advisable, in your opinion, to open it up so that rather than in the ordinance shutting down everything, saying or other activities as may be approved in a conditional use permit? Because I could see in the future that there might be different things that we want to be able to do or to allow without having to go back and change the ordinance.
Okay. Certainly that makes sense. And as you've already indicated, it requires a conditional use permit, and that can be addressed under the conditional use permit as an accessory use.
Okay, some of the things that were mentioned in there, like you can't hook up your trailer outside. I'm wondering how you can hook it up inside, where that happens. And I just thought that if a CUP is required, then the planners could look at each individual project and see what makes sense to allow and what doesn't. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. That's the extent of my questions.
Commissioner Hirschbein, I think you had your hand up, and then we'll take Commissioner Irvin.
As I get older, I have different concerns, and one of them are public restrooms. And I was wondering if it's possible to require publicly accessed restrooms at a service station.
Let me do this. Let me review what the building code requires. And if that doesn't cover it, then we'll address it through the ordinance in the revised update that we bring to you.
And it should maintain public access, because unfortunately, I can't tell you how many times I've tried to use a public restroom or a restroom in a service station, and it's locked and there's no access to it.
And that has become especially apparent during the pandemic.
Correct.
Yeah. So understood. Thank you.
That's a great idea, Commissioner. Thank you. Commissioner Urban.
As strange as that is, that was actually going to be my question. But I guess I could just ask, Flynn, do you feel as if, knowing that this was just on our last planning commission, do you feel that you've had enough time to do enough research so that we don't have to continue to go back in and keep redoing it and doing it over? Do you feel like you've had enough time to put this ordinance together? Is this just us initially seeing this, or is this something that's going to be put into plan right away?
Yes, I do feel that we've had enough time, as there are just minor things that we need to tweak with the ordinance itself. Your comments here this evening are especially helpful to staff. And so we do appreciate the review that the planning commissioners are providing this evening. There's a couple of things that I'd like to further update in terms of utility trailers. They're now called U-Hauls. And so that language is something that I would want to update without using the brand name U-Haul. But you understand the gist of it. So there's minor things that I would still like to tweak as we do these revisions based on your comments. But overall, yes, I think that it is comprehensive enough. And as we've had comments from Commissioner Alayan in terms of making some things more generalized, that helps us in terms of giving the flexibility we need. So as things change in the future, we don't need to come back and keep on redoing this.
Oh, okay, so if something comes up and we have a situation, we kind of can amend it without going through this entire process?
By keeping flexibility in the ordinance, we can do that, yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Maruzzi.
Where did we leave this issue? Did we come to a decision regarding the Walmart, or was that postponed based on discussion?
So yes, we did defer action on the Walmart application pending a proposed modification to the code. So if this code amendment goes forward, we could then reschedule the item for consideration by the Planning Commission.
So the longer that we delay this, the longer they can't get moving on their project.
Correct.
I was under the impression that they were going to come back with a proposal that matched the current zoning.
Not to my knowledge. They still want to stick with their 400 square foot building.
Okay, got it. All right.
Okay.
Other questions, comments? So I have a few. So I'm really glad we're bringing this. I'm sure there's a lot of zoning that is a can of worms like this, that if we opened it, we just see years of numbers and changes that we don't understand, that may have made sense 100 years ago, or they may have been arbitrary. And so, I question a lot of the numbers in this ordinance, like the 20,000 square feet. As Commissioner Alayan pointed out, this type of project would require a CUP anyway. So it's going to get a heightened sense of review. Why not take out some of these numbers altogether and just take these on a case-by-case basis? We like gas stations, and we like them not only because we use gas, but in the future, as other commissioners have pointed out, we could be, service stations could be offering many other types of fuel. And it seems to me the more the merrier. So I would first question the minimum site of 20,000 square feet. Let's say this is just a service station for electric charging. Would it need to be 20,000 square feet? So my suggestion there would be to eliminate that number altogether and simply base it on the application that's coming before us, and using staff review for their use. Jumping ahead to the ground area that you mentioned, Director, I liked your wording, which was replacing that 90% of the area should be paved. Why don't we say a minimum of 10% for landscaping? And specifically landscaping along the street edges, view buffering and use of landscape in those areas. I think if we can do anything to help the aesthetics of service stations be more appealing, this is the place to do it, right? And coming, back to us dictating the size of their buildings. In the future, we may not need any buildings. People may simply pull up and plug their cars in, or we may just need a person to sit in a kiosk to take cash if the machines aren't able to do that. I'd almost like to take that out altogether. Why have a minimum size or a maximum size for that matter? Why not just take that? Just take it as it comes is what I mean, and determine it based on the application. What I'd like to suggest to staff is to really open this up and make it more appealing for service stations to want to come and take them on a case-by-case basis and really reduce this ordinance down to the bare minimums. And are there other areas that other commissioners have in this that they'd like to see specifically looked at or questioned by staff? Commissioner Lynn, you're muted.
Turns out with my blur background, you can't see when I'm raising ahead. I just want to reinforce a couple of things that you said, just so staff has we're not voting on this, it's not an action item, but has a clear sense of where we're coming from. I agree 100% with removing the minimum building size. It didn't make any sense to any of us when it was 750 square feet, picking another arbitrary number and saying 400. I think somebody's going to just regret at some point in the future. I don't think that will help. I also really like Commissioner Hirschbein's suggestion that there be public restrooms. If there were something in the code that required that the public restrooms be kept decent, safe, and sanitary, such that code violations could be written if need be, if there were habitual offenders, that would be very cool. And I also think that the minimum 10% for landscaping is much stronger than the 90%. I like that a lot. Again, it will be reviewed in the CUP, and I think there's a chance to enhance projects for staff to work with applicants as they come through enhancing projects if we do have that in that language.
Thank you. Commissioner Urban, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of agree with what you're saying, but I would like to mention that we probably would have to be careful with opening it wide open, just for the specific reason that we have seen that some of our communities who are a little bit on the lower income have seen the saturation with gas stations, which also leads to liquor, which also we see in a lot of our communities with minorities. So I would like to be careful with the wording and just opening it wide open and allowing gas stations to be everywhere, because they seem to make a way inside of those communities. And I don't think that we want to do that as a city.
Okay, I think that makes sense. They still have to go through the entire conditional use process, and they're only allowed in certain zones and certain places. Commissioner Urban, are you more referring to density or having too many, a concentration issue? Is that what you're speaking to?
Yeah, just a concentration of them. And, we are being progressive and I've been reading in 2025, we were looking at getting more electric vehicles on the road. So we might have to do a whole complete new ordinance when the governor or whoever the state of California decides that we are moving to electric vehicles. So opening it wide open could put us in a situation. It could have a flood of gas stations in one particular area. A lot of the areas where the low income people that live, it tends to be a lot of the places where the ordinance is and the zoning is for a lot of those areas to have those gas stations.
So, Director Flynn, do we have any concentration issues for stations, or is it more driven by zoning for where they are allowed?
It's driven by zoning to a certain degree, but there's also Section A of the ordinance, which does talk about separation between gas stations. Mm-hmm. So what I might recommend based on Commissioner Irvin's comments is let's keep that section in there so that it still requires a separation distance between gas stations to avoid the saturation issue. But other aspects in terms of minimum lot size and other standards, we can eliminate those that are unnecessary that will be reviewed as part of a conditional use permit.
But what is the distance?
The distance separation is a minimum of 500 feet. And there's also a separation distance from schools, parks, playgrounds, and churches.
Same 500?
No, actually it's less, 250.
Are we at a place where we might want to require service stations to offer electric charging, or are we ahead of ourselves?
We already have language in the zoning code that does require charging stations for commercial uses. As Commissioner Song has brought up, I think we need to tailor that perhaps more specifically to gas stations. And so I'd like to do that in the next iteration that I'll bring forward to you.
Excellent. And then there seemed to be good wording on a requirement, and I know this came up relatively recently, that gas stations that sell beer and wine and alcoholic beverages also need to offer foodstuffs. And I think we even tightened that up, didn't we, to require that they have a certain percentage of fresh food?
We haven't in this particular ordinance. That was in the food desert ordinance that we brought forward a while back. In this particular ordinance, it does limit the sale of alcohol, if I believe, to no more than 50% of their overall sales of retail products. That's in Section M of the ordinance. And so there is a requirement that they have to balance the alcohol sales with sales of other retail goods.
Personally, I'd be for prohibiting alcoholic sales out of a gas station.
Or having a minimum retail store square footage before liquor is considered.
Yeah, I mean, if you had a 10,000 square foot store with a gas station out in front, that's one thing. But I don't think we need to see like a mini mart selling booze in front of two pumps. That's not a good thing. I agree that there could be sort of a minimum size before you're allowed to start selling alcohol, but I think generally prohibiting, if it's a gas station, they shouldn't be selling booze. If it's a market with some pumps out in front, that's a different scenario.
So what I hear is your concern that this retailers of alcoholic beverages would use this as a loophole to essentially create a liquor store around a few pumps. Is that what you're saying?
Right.
There isn't really any need to do that, though. They can obtain a conditional use permit through a regular process. There's no need to develop gas pumps in order to do that. Right. So I don't see that as being a concern.
I'm personally not opposed to service stations selling alcohol as long as they're selling a variety of other goods. So service stations have become convenience stores. They're no different to me than a 7-Eleven, except they have pumps. They also provide fuel. So I don't know that I would feel good about prohibiting alcohol in new service stations. Maybe prohibiting alcohol if that's all they're willing to sell.
Again, I like Commissioner Song's idea that you pick a number, maybe it's 10,000 feet, maybe it's bigger, that it would have to be a certain size, which would allow other things to be sold before we would allow alcohol to be sold.
Okay.
Also, if I may add, the minimum square footage of the building where I'm concerned is the protection of the employee, meaning that if we don't have a minimum, then and the employee is sitting out there with a computer tab and exposed to the people who come to use the pumps. I'm wondering if a minimum square footage is really for the protection of the employee in this gas station. If it could be in such way that it's like a secured space with the bathroom. So therefore, a minimum of 150 square feet, or something that says you have to build something for the protection of the employee and the public using the restroom.
Without a square footage, but just put that requirement in there?
Mm-hmm. To define more the use, that the applicant is responsible of providing a protective space for employees and restrooms for the public.
Commissioner Leyen?
Two thoughts. First, in response to that, a question for the director. And a CUP application now, is one of the things that the applicant is expected to address safety or security? Yeah.
So part of the findings that need to be made for a conditional use permit, we do have to look at public safety, health, and welfare.
Okay, so if somebody did propose putting their employee out with a notebook or credit card machine out in the middle of the parking lot, that is something that would jeopardize their ability to get a CUP because you wouldn't be able to make the findings?
Yeah, as part of a discretionary review process, the Planning Commission could find that that's inadequate for protection of the employees.
Okay. And that was just a aside. What I was really going to say is I get a little bit concerned when we start trying to regulate the size, the balance between merchandise and product that a retailer sells. I see that the language here is not redlined as it now stands, which requires that I think 50% of the sales receipts be generated other than with alcohol. And I also see that the police department has been involved in preparing this language. And because we still have gas stations that are wanting to open for business here, I would presume that that is okay. What I don't presume, and I'm not sure if we're qualified as a planning commission to know without talking to somebody in the business, is where that line might fall. My understanding is in the retail gasoline sales, the margins are razor thin, pennies on per gallon. I believe that the liquor margins, liquor is a much more profitable undertaking. If we agree that gas stations are necessary in the community, then I would hate to use our zeal for minimizing alcohol sales or convenience of alcohol sales to essentially prohibit gas stations from coming because we codified what the balance should be based on our own gut feel. I would suggest that if we are considering either requiring a minimum square footage of retail sales or something else, or tweaking the balance other than what is existing and presumptively working, that if we want to tweak that, we ask staff to research further and come back to us with a recommendation rather than imposing our own thoughts.
Good point. I would add that perhaps some of what we're suggesting could be guidelines in direction to a potential applicant versus requirements. And that would guide future planning commissions and city councils in what we're looking for. Because I'm sensitive to Commissioner Leyen's comments. I worry that if we have too many requirements, again, we will kill the we will kill potential applicants who want to bring service stations. And it seems to me they require a certain blend of sales, like alcohol versus gas and things like that, to be profitable. And so we don't want to discourage the service stations, but at the same time, we don't want them just to be a liquor store with a gas pump attached. So is that enough direction for you?
Well, I guess I have a slightly different viewpoint than you do, Vice Chair. I don't see that we have a lack of service stations in the city. I think there's adequate service stations. I mean, we might add a few more in the future, but I mean, we've got a lot of service stations. I've never had to wait in line for service for gas here, like you might in some large metropolitan areas. But I can't really say we don't have enough service stations. And if we get a few more, that's fine. But I don't think we have a lack of them. And as far as needing to sell alcohol to justify the cost for a service station, we've got lots of service stations that don't sell alcohol. So I'm not totally agreeing with what you're saying there.
I'm simply saying that I worry about having too many requirements. I don't know that we need more or less gas stations, but it seems to me that in the future, we're going to have other fuel options.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Yeah, so I guess my thinking is more fuel options would potentially come from more fuel stations. And so I just want to keep it flexible enough for those potential uses.
I'd like to ask the planning director if a entrepreneur, real estate developer wanted to buy a piece of property in Palm Springs and put up a row of electric charging stations, would he fall under the jurisdiction of this code section?
No, he wouldn't, because he's not dispensing fuel per se.
So electricity is not defined as fuel then?
No. In Section 9306 of the zoning code, we define electric charging stations and we say where they can be located. And based on that language, we are encouraging them with all other types of retail development. If someone were to come in and, for example, do Tesla, they wouldn't need a conditional use permit as a gas station because they are technically not defined as a gas station under another section of the ordinance. They would need site plan review and things like that, but they wouldn't need to come under the conditional use permit for a gas station.
Compressed natural gas, and I know that
compressed natural gas or hydrogen, those would both be considered fuel.
And I've been reading that they're now looking at new synthetic gasolines that will be far more sustainable and more ecological. So I think what we're hearing is we need to plan for more than just gasoline. It sounds like electric can stand on its own, but we may be dealing with alternative fuel options as well. Do we have more suggestions or comments on this for staff? And staff, do you have enough from us to bring back a draft?
Yes, we do.
Any other thoughts? Okay, thank you all. I think a lot of good ideas came out of that. Let's move on to our second discussion item, which is essentially, I guess, just an update from you on the general plan, or an update to the general plan.
Correct. We're providing a status update on the 2007 general plan update. Let me share my screen here so we can go through the presentation. Okay. So as you may recall, when we talked about the housing element in July, we said that we are kind of approaching the update now as a two-phase or two-track process to adopt the four elements that we are updating. The first path or track that we're on is to ensure that we adopt the housing element to comply with statutory deadlines. The state requires that cities in their sixth cycle housing element adoption, which includes Palm Springs, have an adopted element by October 15th. of 2021. There is a 120-day grace period that the state allows. However, there's some things that are tied to that. So I'll go through kind of where we're at in that process. We're also the second pathway that we're on is related to adopting the other chapters or elements, the land use, circulation, and safety elements, and those would be completed after we complete the housing element. But there's still work being done on the general plan generally for the entire process. So as you'll recall, related to the housing element, we've had some recommendations from the General Plan Steering Committee. They gave recommendations related to land use changes, specifically a couple of sites that we would increase the density on in the city, as well as some changes to the land use descriptions of the land use element. They also reviewed the RENA strategy, the city's strategy to address the RENA numbers that we were handed down from the state.
Could you tell us where RENA is?
The Regional Housing Needs Allocation.
Thank you.
So those are the numbers that the city has to plan for the next 8-year cycle, or the next 8-year period. In our case, we have to plan for all income levels for roughly 2,500 units. So everything from very low to above moderate. We had our neighborhood listening sessions this past June. We had the community workshop in July, as well as a review of the draft housing element by the Planning Commission and City Council. After we went through those steps, we submitted a draft document to the state on August 2nd. And so they have 60 days to review the draft element and provide comments. So that we received their comments on October 1st. So just about 2 weeks ago, we got the comments from the Housing and Community, the Department of Housing and Community Development, which is the state agency that reviews housing elements. They do the document, or the letter that we received is about an 8-page letter with comments that we require revisions to our housing element. As bad as that may sound, I've heard other cities are getting 10 to 12-page letters, so I guess we're lucky. But in any case, we're addressing those comments with the city's general plan consultant, PlaceWorks, and incorporating changes to ensure that the city's housing element is compliant with state law. As we finalize those revisions to the document, we will be posting the revisions on the general plan website, psgeneralplan.com. And so those will be available for the public to review. In terms of what's next, after HCD gets our response, which we intend to submit by the end of this month, they'll have an additional 60-day review. And ultimately, the plan is that they would review the revisions that we've made, determine that those revisions bring the plan into conformance with state requirements. And then we would hold public hearings to adopt the housing element. And so we expect that would occur after the 60-day period in January of next year. As I mentioned, this allows us to adopt within the 120-day extension from October 15th, which is the statutory deadline imposed by the state for housing elements in the 6th cycle. So that's kind of where we've been, what's happening, and what's next for the housing element. In terms of the other processes that we're going through with the general plan update, we are still doing outreach for the vision and priority statements as directed by City Council. The General Plan Steering Committee will be meeting to discuss revisions to the circulation plan, as well as the goals, policies, and action items for the land use element, circulation element, and safety elements. As we get through that in the next few months, we will begin the environmental analysis that is required for adopting the general plan. And then ultimately that would take some time for staff and the consultant to prepare. After we get through that, the final elements can be adopted by Planning Commission and City Council. So we don't expect that we would get through this process until probably the summer or potentially fall of next year by the time we get through the next steps of the process. So with that, I can turn over to the commission if there are any questions, but that is generally the update that we wanted to provide to you today.
Thank you, Mr. Newell. Questions of staff? Commissioner Irvin, you are muted there.
Yeah, sorry. My question is, do we get that packet of information that presentation that you just presented?
I can send it to the commission. Yeah, I haven't. Okay. This is something that was not provided as a part of the backup materials to your agenda. So this was just prepared this week.
Okay, and then Newell, did you say that there will be another? Is there any more community meetings set up?
There will be additional community meetings as a part of the general plan update process. So yes, we'll have, our steering committee meetings are open to the public. So anyone can go to those meetings. At this time, we haven't got the next meeting scheduled yet, but that once it's scheduled, it'll be on the website, psgeneralplan.com. And I do believe we have one more community-wide workshop for the general plan update.
Okay, thank you.
This is open. Questions or comments to staff? Commissioner Hirschbein.
I don't know if this is the right place to ask. I could postpone until Planning Commission comments, but how does SB 9 figure into this? And where are we at with updating our code for SB 9?
So SB 9 would be something that would be really an additional measure that the state is imposing that's separate and apart from our housing element. We haven't really incorporated that as a part of the strategy. I guess that would really just allow for additional units that could be built and we could determine as helping the city meet its RENA numbers. But that's not the strategy we're using to address the lower or moderate income levels at this time. And as far as an update, in terms of local update to our code, staff will be working on an update to the zoning code to ensure that we address that law as close as possible to the effective date, which is January 1st of next year. So that would be something that the commission would review here in the next couple of months.
Thank you.
Questions? Comments? Thank you very much for that. That was a helpful update. So you're saying we're about a year off?
Yeah, to be safe, it's probably another, maybe a little less than a year. It's hard to adopt the general plan during the summer when people are away. But if we're through it by the time we're in summer and we're still doing online meetings, maybe it won't be so difficult. Okay.
I only asked that question because, that's something the press might pick up. So are you happy with that date?
Well, there's no date specifically yet, but when we have one, it'll be published.
Okay, thank you. Planning Commission reports, requests, comments. Any ideas, thoughts, complaints, compliments?
All of the above.
Commissioner Hirschbein and then Commissioner Song.
The hotel site that was cleared on North Palm Canyon, does the city control that site or own that site?
No, we do not.
Okay. And so it's done now? That's what we're going to be looking at until new development takes place?
Yes, and I hope you're happy with it.
Happier. But let's ask Commissioner Maruzzi what his opinion is.
You're muted, Pete. Oh. Commissioner Song.
Yes, thank you. So I wanted to ask on projects that are complicated, that take 2 years for the entitlement process, and then after that it takes sometimes 2 years, 4 years, 6 years to get financed, and we have those coming back to us. And what is the framework in which the Planning Commission could review those projects? And I understand that we have to work within the findings. In, for example, sort of Serena Park projects, in which they're coming for an extension, but the project may have been approved 4 or 6 years ago, and therefore during 4 or 6 years, many things might have changed environmentally or the growth of the city. And so it's not clear of we cannot reopen and look at the project again, and therefore we have to stay within the entitlement that was approved several years ago. Or is there a framework on which we could review the project to the current conditions?
Mr. Priest, if you might want to tackle that one.
Yes, thanks. Mr. Vice Chair, members of the Commission. To the extent that a permit is granted, that generally conveys a vested right to the developer to proceed with that project. And unless there is a specific, condition included to perhaps revisit a particular issue, that right is vested and they can proceed with development. And so usually, as long as they have a vested right, there is not an opportunity to come back and revisit the permit that was granted. However, in some cases where they may be asking for an extension or an amendment to an existing development agreement or something like that, there may be opportunities to revisit certain issues. But as a general rule, usually there's a vested right to proceed with development. And if they don't proceed within a timely manner, then our code has other provisions that deal with that as well.
So
I hope that answered the question.
So, Mr. Priest, what that education tells me is that when reviewing complicated projects, they should be in the conditions of approval. That when the project takes longer than what is estimated, that the body that's reviewing it is allowed to look at traffic, certain aspects of the project to the current conditions. Because
there are limits to what the Commission can do on that with an extension. It really depends on the particular project. Again, as a general rule, there is not, reassessing the project. Again, I think, in the case of an extension or asking for an amendment to an agreement, we would have to assess that each case on its facts.
Okay.
Flynn, did you have anything perhaps more to say on that, or?
Not really. Commissioner Song, is this only about Serena Park, or are there other projects? Because each project has a specific entitlement process that it's been through. Serena Park, for example, has a development agreement which intentionally preserves their rights to develop for an extended period of time. That's not going to apply to other projects that may have been entitled through a different type of process.
I think what I'm looking for is there a verbiage that protects both parties, in which if the project comes back several years later and they still want to continue with the project, styles changes, circulation changes, environmental issues changes, and therefore could we bring the project more up to date than how it was reviewed and approved previously. And I understand that that will be a huge cost to the developer to have that kind of opening or opportunity for a body to relook at a project. And I understand that it's very specific to what the issues are. But I think more, not as an answer today, but more as a framework of projects have a lifetime in which some proceed effectively and some don't. And so when they're straining along on a long period of time, do we have a tool in which we can revisit the project? And it sounds like it really doesn't, unless it's very specific to a certain issue.
Yeah, I think the best thing that the Planning Commission has done, I believe back in 2017, when we revised the extension of time requirements, that we were very specific that projects would not be extended for more than 2 years past the original 2-year deadline. I think that more than any other action that the Planning Commission has taken has been very effective in terms of dealing with projects that are drawn out. So that we won't see projects, for example, the Cody Place project, unfortunately, is one of those that got drawn out over, 10 years. And so I don't think you'll see those going forward in the future, just based on the changes that you've already made to the code.
Other questions or comments for staff? Okay, we're kind of shockingly moving into the end of our meeting here. Director Fagg, comments?
Yes, I do. Just very quickly before I turn it over to Mr. Newell. You had public comment earlier in the meeting today from Ms. Rogers asking about a cat cafe. I just wanted to clarify that that would indeed require an amendment to our zoning code to allow kenneling in commercial districts. We've discussed this as a planning commission at least twice during my tenure here with the city of Palm Springs. Once back in 2015, where we looked at allowing pet daycare and kenneling in the downtown area. And then again in about 2016 or 2017, when we revised the use table for the central business district. In neither case was the Planning Commission comfortable in allowing kennels in the downtown area. But if you feel that perhaps the time has changed and maybe that's something you want to consider, please let us know and we could prepare a zone text amendment to address that issue.
Is this something that you plan to put on the agenda so we can discuss it, or you want us to contact you informally and ask you to put it on?
If there's interest, we'll put it on an agenda to discuss. It most likely won't be your agenda on the 27th because that one's already jam-packed with lots of items. So it would have to wait until November or December.
I'd like to request that we do bring it up as a discussion item. I'd like to hear where we've been and where we might go with this.
Okay. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and prepare a discussion item and we can look at the past attempts that we've talked about this and look at how we might move forward to address the concern of Ms. Rogers.
And maybe also, Director, we could understand what other cities are doing. According to Ms. Rogers, there are over 100 successful versions of this. So maybe we could know a little bit about these others and how they're doing it and how their zoning altered for them, at least a sampling, not all 125 of them, but at least a sampling of where it works and why.
Okay, certainly. So we'll go ahead and schedule that. Thank you. Mr. Newell, do you have anything?
No, I think you've already covered it. The only thing I was going to add is related to the 27th. October 27th, we have 5 public hearings. So that will be a long meeting. So just be prepared, please. That's it.
Can we start that meeting at noon? Okay, we've done it. And unless staff has any more to offer us, I think we're ready for adjournment. Thank you all for tolerating me tonight. Thank you for keeping it brief. And let's all remember this wonderfully short meeting. I think this is some sort of a world record for the city of Palm Springs.
Thank
Night,
you.
everyone.
Good night.
Bye-bye.